I want to thank our men and women. They are so good, of the National Park Service, Air Traffic Control, and the United States military. God bless you. God bless our heroes. God bless America. And now let the flyovers begin. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome world-renowned air show announcer Rob Ryder as he walks us through our salute of air power from World War II to the future. Please enjoy.
Good evening, Mr. President and Madam First Lady and distinguished guests. I'm Rob Ryder, and I'm honored to be your narrator for an aerial review to celebrate our Independence Day. Our flyovers tonight will showcase air power across time. Look at the screens and look above. Representing World War II, after we were brought into World War II by the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Approaching first, two very important airplanes known as C-47s. They were the military designation for the Douglas DC-3, the airliner that changed the way America traveled. Carrying 28 paratroopers, they were also involved in the D-Day invasion, over 1,000 of them in that operation alone on June 6, 1944. Over 10,000 of these aircraft were built. Following that, as we move from heritage to horizons and continuing in World War II, one of the most famous aircraft of all time. You can see it in the center of this formation. It is the Boeing B-17 bomber. Over 12,700 of these were built, flying daring daylight raids over Europe, bombing targets, military targets and industrial targets in Nazi-held Europe. And on the wings, the escort fighters, among the most well-known aircraft of all time, the North American Aviation P-51 Mustang. Over 15,000 of those were built. They, among others, were flown by the famed Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen flew 15,000 sorties in Europe and North Africa during the war, earning the name by request. The radial engines on the B-17, the V-12 liquid-cooled Rolls-Royce designed Packard-built Merlin engines powering all of those aircraft. Of the more than 15,000 of those P-51s built between 1940 and 1945, about 160 remain flyable in the world today. Then Senator Harry Truman's Senate War Investigating Committee called the Mustang the most aerodynamically perfect pursuit plane in existence. At the beginning of the war, even though we were attacked by Japan, a great deal of our effort went to our allies in Europe who were being overrun by Nazi Germany. However, the C-47s that we saw were not only active in the European theater, but along with its naval counterpart, the R-4D, were key to the Allied campaign through Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and Burma to support the Chinese forces fighting the light-traveling Japanese army. More mundane of its duties, but probably of greater importance, was the use of the C-47s to haul urgently needed personnel and supplies, including fuel and munitions, in all theaters of the war. The C-47 flew hump missions over the Himalayas from India to China, leading to the many of the tactics that would be used in the Berlin airlift of 1948 to 49. As the war in Europe wound down, the P-51 Mustang became more common. Eventually, with the capture of Iwo Jima, it was able to be used as the bomber escort during Boeing B-29 Superfortress missions against the Japanese homeland. But our fighting men and women were being pounded by the Japanese at every turn in the Pacific. They and those at home needed a morale boost. President Roosevelt put his military planners to work on an audacious plan to bomb the Japanese homeland. That island country hadn't been attacked on its own soil in over 2,000 years, and they felt invincible. Depending on whose accounts you read, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle and a general from the Army Air Force sat in a restaurant, and Doolittle hatched a plan that the general initially laughed at, but after a while thought it might work. It was to involve types of military hardware never intended to work together. And on April 18th, 1942, just 4 months after Pearl Harbor, two of these aircraft approaching from the right, the B-25 Mitchell bombers, that normally took a third of a mile to take off, were launched from the USS Aircraft Harrier Hornet in only 467 feet. The damage these 16 planes did to the Japanese homeland was minimal, but their feeling of invincibility was broken, and they kept much-needed personnel back for homeland defense. It was a strategic turning point in the war and remains to this day the air mission against which all other air missions have been measured. The largest plane in our Army Air Force inventory in World War II was the 99-foot-long, 140-feet wingspan of the Boeing B-29 Super Fortress. It pushed the bounds of technology with a first-ever pressurized crew compartment and a radically advanced analog fire control system that allowed one gunner and a fire control officer to direct 4 remote machine gun turrets. The Super Fortress, I should say, would have the greatest impact of any aircraft in the Pacific theater. On August 6, 1929, a B-29 named Enola Gay would drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a B-29 like this boxcar dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, leading to Japan's complete surrender at the end of the War of the Pacific on August 14th, 1945. Of the 4,000 B-29s that were built, you're seeing one of only 2 flying today. Ladies and gentlemen, the war in Europe and the war in the Pacific, from heritage to horizons. The Korean War, the conflict between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Republic of Korea, South Korea, reached international proportions in June of 1950, when North Korea, supplied and advised by the Soviet Union, invaded the South. The United Nations, with the United States as the principal participant, joined the war on the side of the South Koreans, and the People's Republic of China came to North Korea's aid. Aerial warfare was a large factor in Korea. It was the first jet war. However, piston engine aircraft were still used in a great way during the Korean conflict. And as we see that B-29 flying off to the side, in just a moment, we will be seeing an airplane known as the A-26 Invader. Initially designed to replace 3 other twin-engine World War II airplanes, it was so good that it served ably in World War II, Korea, and even in Vietnam. It flew the first and last combat missions in the Korean conflict, and as a light bomber and attack aircraft, Invaders typically bombed truck convoys and trains, but also engaged MiG fighters. The 2 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radial engines developed 2,000 horsepower each, giving the Invader the capability to carry 11,000 pounds of munitions at a speed of more than 350 miles per hour. And in 1940, Chance Bott Corporation built what was then the fastest single-engine aircraft ever built, the F-4U Corsair. The bent wing bird, as it was known, it achieved a forward speed of 400 miles per hour with its 2,000 horsepower R2800 Pratt & Whitney radial engine. The Japanese soldiers dubbed it Whistling Death because of the sound it made during its ground attack missions. But an air-to-air role, it racked up an impressive 11-to-1 aerial victory ratio against Japanese planes. The Corsair remained in production longer than any other single-engine piston-driven fighter, with the last one coming off the production line in late 1952. In late 1952, September of that year, Marine Captain Jesse Fulmer, flying a piston-driven F-4U Corsair, shot down a MiG-15 jet and was awarded the Silver Star by the President. In all, 12,571 Corsairs were built by Chance Vaught, Brewster Aircraft, and believe it or not, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company of Akron, Ohio. At the beginning of the conflict, our straight-wing Lockheed Shooting Stars were totally outclassed by the swept-winged Russian MiG, but we rushed into production a swept-wing fighter by North American Aviation called the F-86 Saberjet. It racked up a better than 10-to-1 victory ratio, but sadly, the F-86 that we had hoped to have flying here this evening came up with a mechanical problem and was unable to be here. Coming through on the screens now from the right, you can see the Douglas Invader, the light bomber. In the picture with it, you can see the bent wing bird on that Chance Vaught Corsair with its huge engine and a huge propeller. And then from P-51 to F-51 as the new designation of the young United States Air Force, on the right wing, the Mustang also served ably during the Korean conflict. Let's listen. Moving on to Vietnam. The Vietnam War pitted the communist government of North Vietnam against South Vietnam. And during the war, the United States relied on the helicopter in combat as never before. It truly became the helicopter war. Many of you will remember the TV show and movie MASH about the mobile army surgical hospitals during the Korean conflict. Well, the opening sequence showed wounded soldiers being transported by a bubble-canopied helicopter known as the Bell H-13 Sioux helicopter. It was during that war that the helicopter became indispensable, greatly increasing the survivability of wounded soldiers on the battlefield by airlifting them to the MASH units. In 1965, the Army began testing and developing new techniques to enhance future warfighting capabilities. Helicopter tactics developed in Korea were adapting and evolving to support a new concept in maneuver warfare, air mobility. And here they come. The Huey, the UH-1 Iroquois. An estimated 11,000 took to the skies for almost 19 years. They flew slicks, troop carriers, gunship missions, attack, and dust-off medical evaluation. The UH-1s we see flying here today are from the 1st Helicopter Squadron from Joint Base Andrews. And just last December, they celebrated their 50th anniversary. Coming through after that, developed from the UH-1 Iroquois, these are the Cobras, the first helicopter designed from the skids up to be an attack helicopter. And following that, the heavy lift CH-47 Chinook with an incredible capability to carry nearly 22,750 pounds underneath the aircraft. It was 1946 that this airplane was first thought of, and it was in 1948 that Boeing designers in one weekend came up with this incredible design of an airplane that has now been flying for the United States Air Force for 68 years. Swept wing, the ability to go over 8,000 miles at speeds of over 600 miles per hour. This, ladies and gentlemen, one of the triad of the Air Force's bomber capabilities, the B-52 Stratofortress. Dropping tens of thousands of tons of bombs during the Vietnam conflict. It was known as the Buff, the big, ugly, fat fella. In all, 744 were built. About 75 still remain in service today and is expected to remain so until 2040. I am told that grandfathers, sons, and grandsons have all flown the B-52 bomber in the course of those 68 years. Moving now to Desert Storm. And in August of 1990, Iraqi forces under the control of Saddam Hussein invaded the sovereign nation of Kuwait in the Middle East. Kuwaiti forces were quickly overwhelmed by the Iraqi Republican Guard divisions, and in the coming months, the United States led a coalition to force the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. And on a dark, quiet morning in January, only feet above the Kuwaiti desert, 8 Apache helicopters from the 101st Airborne Division fired the first shots of Operation Desert Storm. Apaches destroyed 2 Iraqi early warning radar sites, blinding Iraqi radar and air defense forces and setting conditions for the beginning of the larger air campaign by the Air Force and the Navy. The Apache, still the most advanced attack helicopter today, is commonly referred to as a flying tank, able to survive in highly contested environments while inflicting maximum damage to enemy targets day or night in poor weather conditions. Also serving in that war, the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter by Sikorsky, the Army's utility tactical transport helicopter. The Black Hawk has replaced the famous Huey as the Army's workhorse, and a single Black Hawk can transport an entire 11-person, fully equipped infantry squad into battle. Over the years, the UH-60 has been constantly upgraded with more powerful engines and other improvements. Here come the helos. And as they approach, let me tell you about the next airplanes coming through. Ever since World War I, the first air war, where the average life of a fighter pilot was only 3 weeks, achieving air superiority has been the goal of military planners. An airplane that first flew in 1972 and entered service in 1976 has long been considered an air superiority fighter, the F-15 Eagle. Capable of speeds at more than 2.5 times the speed of sound, Mach 2.5, or for us non-fighter pilots, that's 1,875 miles per hour. The single-seat F-15C and its younger brother, the 2-seat F-15E Strike Eagle, have dominated the skies in any battle situation with power, maneuverability, and a wide variety of weapons. Its kill ratio is unmatched. 104 aerial combat victories and 0 losses. The incredible thrust-to-weight ratio of the Eagle enabled it to set a number of world records, including a time-to-climb record of 98,400 feet. That's 18.5 miles in just under 2.5 minutes. The Strike Eagle utilizes a second crew member and advanced radar and avionics to enable it to become the lethal ground attack aircraft. At the beginning of the Gulf War, Strike Eagles flying at 600 miles per hour, 100 feet above desert sands, used terrain-following radar, lights out, to take out Saddam's early warning radars. Overhead now, we see the Apache helicopters, followed by the UH-60 Black Hawks. And here come the Eagles. I know a lot of you have your cameras up, but if you don't, how about a round of applause for what we've seen thus far? The events of September 11th, 2001 changed the world and forever reshaped history. Our brave servicemen and women are still committed to keeping Americans safe today, and approaching in just a moment are a few of the many aircraft that have served vital roles in the war on terrorism. Igor Sikorsky, the father of the modern helicopter, overcame significant aerodynamic and physics challenges in his development of rotary winged flight. Without getting into a lot of mind-numbing stuff, a phenomenon called retreating blade stall has always limited the speed at which a helicopter could travel. The holy grail would be to develop an aircraft that could take off and land vertically, but be able to fly as fast as a conventional airplane. In the 1980s, Bell Aircraft, the same company that developed the